Hello again, everyone. We are a bit late in the program, so I'll be very quick. We are pleased here to welcome Chad Williams to the Business Agility Conference Paris. Chad is a change agent and a business agility facilitator, and he is a co-founder of Be Agile and is recognized as one of the leading agile consultants in Africa. With experience implementing agile in organizations, ranging insights from several thousand agile practitioners to a small software development company with 20 plus employees. Chad will discuss the unique differences and surprising commonalities that organizations of all sizes should consider. Chad, the stage is yours.
Thank you so much, Assam. Firstly, full disclaimer, I'm not a medical doctor. The information in this talk is not intended or implied to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. The human body is a complex ecosystem of connected subsystems, constantly activating, growing, mobilizing parts of itself to combat threats, both internal and external. Through a combination of possibly evolution, our genetics, maybe some lifestyle choices, our immune systems are, to a lesser or a greater extent, able to deal with hostile takeovers from bugs, viruses, disease. There's this constant battle that's being fought to maintain balance and homeostasis within our bodies. There's this internal change and fight that occurs continuously. We have to deal with digestion, temperature control, sleeping, waking, eating, who knows what. But even more challenging, longer term conflicts like aging, weight gain, weight loss, diabetes, and like cancer. Let's not even talk about the wars that get waged when we have to deal with external factors like wounds, trauma, COVID, family strife, politics. How do we survive? Do we consciously direct the forces within our bodies to combat these bugs? Do we wake up in the morning and call an emergency meeting with ourselves that's based on a PowerPoint presentation that we compiled miraculously overnight while we slept, deciding maybe where we're going to send these white blood cells, arrange logistics, funding, feeding through our lymph nodes, possibly to discover and deliver teams where the battle needs to be fought. I'm sure you can agree that this isn't a conscious decision. We do this without even thinking about it. For sure, we might help get the help from external consultants, medicine, doctors, vitamins. These are going to help supplement our internal forces. But ultimately, it's a battle that our own systems have to fight. There are just too many factors to consider. Even if we were able to see what was going on, just the sheer number of variables, the systems within systems, our vascular system, our immune system, endocrine system, pulmonary system, there is no way that with the relationships that they have with each other, it's impossible for us to direct or instruct specific action. What we can do, however, through deliberate life choices, is set up those conditions that favor good health and ecosystem survival. This refers largely to the ecosystem, however, not the individual elements of the system. So enough about our bodies. Let's dive a little bit into the business context. Let's have a look at systems. But before we do, and of course, I'm sure you understand that first principles are extremely important. And Ray Dalio in his book Principles shares a lot of good value with us. But their ability to be leveraged according to the information we receive from feedback loops in our systems is what makes it truly powerful. Nassim Taleb, in his book, Anti-Fragile, the things that gain from disorder, he controversially talks about how anti-fragility is this property to allow us to handle uncertainty, to do things without understanding them. In fact, he even goes as far as to say that we're largely better at doing than what we are at thinking. So if I take that concept where we want to be able to get stronger from our exposure to uncertainty and to change and external influences, how do we make sure that the things that we do, which Taleb says we're frankly better at, and then overlay the thinking from Daniel Kahneman in his book Thinking Fast and Slow, who says that there are effectively two systems of thinking. System one is based on our emotion and subconscious and fear and the things that we just do without even thinking about them. And then system two, which is based on slow and more deliberate thought, logic, things that we have thought about, that we've experienced and we apply going forward. So how do we get to the point where the things that we do instinctively, system one from Kahneman, have a higher potential of success? I suggest that maybe through stability and centeredness, anti-fragility of the elements of our systems, the people, the platforms, the machines, we're able to respond to greater and more frequent stresses in a way that ensures continued growth and survival. What does this look like, though? It's not a superpower. Thing that we can do, we can do lots of experiments. We can fail often, of course, and get feedback from that. We can build up a resilience to negative emotions that are normally associated with failure. We can find ourselves in a supportive environment with clarity of vision and transparency of that environment, transparency of the people around us. This last thought, transparency, or the ability to visualize clearly our environment and where we can, possibly, the systemic elements and their relationships. That's where we want to focus. It allows us to leverage and act on our ability to have clarity from our capability perspective, have diminished biases, and have contextual awareness. Can we, now that we're leveraging this thought leadership on systems, thinking from people like Edwards Deming, Draper Kaufman, Donella Meadows, can we create this non-emotional landscape that allows us to experiment and become anti-fragile in our chosen domain? So Thinking in Systems, this fantastic book by Donella H. Meadows, she provides us with a model and some clear language to use when considering the dynamics of the ecosystem that we work and live in. And it's especially true now in this COVID age where the overlap between our home life and our work life is significantly larger. If I was going to quote Ms. Meadows, a system has got to consist of three things: elements, interconnections, and a purpose for the system to exist. Within that context, we have stocks, those items that you can see, feel, or touch. For example, the water in a bathtub, using her example. They've got quantity, and they can represent tangible or intangible assets if we look at it from a business perspective. In other words, there's a good chance that they would appear on the balance sheet of an income statement. Flows are what cause stocks to change over time. We've got inflows and outflows. They act on our stocks and increase or decrease the quantity of these stocks. Birth rate and death rate impact our census and the number of people in our nation. Deposits or withdrawals decrease our bank balance. Motivation or demotivation decreases our ability to work. A valuable and necessary way to look at how flows and stocks interact is through the impact that these flows have on our stocks over time. These provide graphs of system behavior that allow us to forecast and trend and change our behavior. Feedback loops are mechanisms that affect the flows when the stock changes. If you put on a lot of weight over the holidays because you ate too much cake, you feel uncomfortable and your pants are too tight. This is a balancing feedback loop that affects the amount that you then eat afterwards, flow into your body. This decreases the amount of excess fat on your body. The stock reduces. When you've lost all the weight, you look, you feel good. And this also controls how much you eat, wanting to stay looking good for that beach body. This is a reinforcing feedback loop. So considering the system that we've just discussed now, what we do need to be aware of, though, is the impact of something called bounded rationality, where people with the best of intentions make rational decisions based on the information that they have available to them. This information, though, most often is incomplete. And if we don't consider the bigger picture, it may negatively impact the overall performance of the system. Donella speaks about Herbert Simon, who's a Nobel Prize winning economist who coined the phrase bounded rationality, and also says that we are satisficers. The word satisficers comes from two words: satisfying, in other words, we meet our needs, and sufficiently, which means that we meet our needs well enough so that we can move on to something else. We no longer need one thing. What's fascinating from Simon's observations is most likely that the person who has this bounded rationality, when he moves or she moves into a different context, from, let's say, being a developer to being promoted and sitting in this decision-making powerful place of being able to make architectural decisions for the company, he or she sometimes forgets the previous boundaries and loses context. They move from one conceptual silo into another.
So let's have a look at that other example from Simon. That maybe as a financier, you'll overinvest in market booms when the market is increasing, and maybe underinvest when the market is retracting. Your context is different. It's not really the individual that we're questioning here. It's the domain, the context, and more importantly, our relational understanding of where the boundaries of the context lie in relation to the organization as a whole. So how do we provide that necessary perspective of the bigger system, the ecosystem, to allow the autonomy, the mastery, and the purpose from Daniel Pink's book Drive, to allow knowledge workers to take the initiative and guide, innovate, deliver within their bounded system in order to support the larger businesses into the future. So if we're faced with constant change from the market, from our economy, from the environment, from society, if our actors are lost and indecisive, actors being our people, in constant fear of making the wrong decisions, we may find that our organizations overcorrect and sometimes respond too late with inadequate action, working with feedback loops that are delayed and spiral us into disaster. These bounded systems don't know how to relate to each other. So what do we need to do then? One, we need to understand this ecosystem. We need to map out the stocks, the flows, the feedback loops in our business context. There obviously are going to be several of these. All of these are bounded by the definitions that we ourselves establish. The important question to ask, though, is how do these fit together? Which are relevant to understand now for the discussion at hand? So a potential way to start this conversation is to understand your organization from a causal loop diagram perspective. This requires less detail and is an easier way, was an easier image more to construct than the stock flow and feedback loops. Secondly, if we understand our systems and, of course, our subsystems, and then larger, those ecosystems, we need to make sure that we're measuring the right things. So we've read about and experienced the benefits of setting the right goals for our organizations. Donna Meadows states that its best way to influence your system's behavior is giving them the right goals. But be careful what you wish for. She uses the analogy of that old toy, the slinky, that demonstrates that systems themselves have got characteristics and behavior patterns and behave differently, respond differently based on the context or the environment in which they're operating. The slinky would go nowhere if it was sitting on a flat table. So we need to consider this when we identify and set expectations from our systems. Then, if we look at OKRs, and OKRs, we just heard from Evan earlier, objectives and key results. In fact, Evan, I thought I'd give you a shameless plug there for GTM Hub. If we consider these OKRs, we're able to provide the necessary purpose of our systems, which is, as you remember, the third element in the system, and then put into place interim yardsticks or measures that help let us know whether we're on the right path when we pull those levers of change, using the flows of our system to affect the quantity, the level of the stocks that we previously described. For example, inventory, capital, staff headcount, bank balance, or even staff morale and happiness and customer net promoter scores. So we've got great examples from Google and Philippe Castro of what OKRs should look like. And then thirdly, and this is the true purpose of my talk, once we have a perspective on the individual's place within the many systems that we need to play a role, we need to make sure that we enable the elements, we enable the people, we enable the individuals within our organizations, make sure that they're stable, that they're supported, that they're well adjusted, that they're calm, that they have a set of principles that they deeply understand and connect them and who they stand for to the organization as a whole. We should constantly reinforce this value of having stability in our lives, and what can we do as organizations to recognize that these individuals are unique. The humans working in these systems and what they do for us, we've got to allow them to be the best that they can. Similarly, we need to look at those mechanical and technical elements of our systems, our platforms, our processes, our tools, and our data, and make sure that they're up to date, stable, functioning optimally. There are many guidelines and approaches to providing the platform and systemic stability without sacrificing responsiveness, or, as per the subject of this conference, affecting business agility. So I won't go into those there. That's probably a topic for another conference. Once we understand the elements of our systems, how these combine in systems and systems of systems or ecosystems, then we can consider how we drive and steer these ecosystems in a direction that provides value to us, our businesses, our society as a whole. We can even throw chaos at them and see and how they innovate and how they grow and how they thrive and surprise us. So in closing, the reason for my disclaimer at the start of my talk is I believe that when the conference closes tomorrow, the one thing that you can do, that you have to do, is what you've got control over. So take care of yourself. You're an element in this ecosystem, in these systems of systems. Think about your role in these many systems that you act in. How can you play the best possible role that you can? What can you do to prepare for those unknowns that are going to pull levers in your systems that you haven't even identified yet? There are always going to be those levers. From Nassim Taleb, those black swan events are never far away. Are you and your systems anti-fragile? You can prepare for this in a number of ways. I'll just give you a couple that I use. I meditate. I spend a lot of time thinking and quietening my mind. I free dive. I understand the core, the essence of who I am biologically, my inner self. I've looked inside. I also follow those Stoic philosophers, Seneca, Marcus Aurelius. And I realize that I'm part of a bigger system. And in order for that system to work, I need to be the best me that I can. My name's Chad Williams. I'm from Be Agile. And I learn every day from illustrious speakers like we've heard from earlier today and later with Brian Chu and tomorrow's speakers. But more importantly, I learn from connecting with people that work in systems that connect with my systems in this greater ecosystem that we call life. I thank you.
Thank you, Chad, for your talk. It was very interesting. One of the questions we have for you is you talked about systems and ecosystems and subsystems. Can you explain to us a bit more, and if you can, some examples about the difference you make between systems and ecosystems and subsystems?
Sure. So quite often we've got bounded systems that are controlled by the parameters or the authority or the control that particular individuals and departments might have. So you might have a subsystem called sales in your organization, or a subsystem called development, or a subsystem that's called operations. And these are driven quite often by different measures, and the metrics and the KPIs that they use don't often cross over that boundary that I spoke about earlier into what would be successful for another system. But if we collect the sales system and the marketing system and the development and the operations and the client system and the marketplace system, we connect them all together. We talk about this ecosystem that needs to be able to work together. So a client that is unhappy and reduces demand from us as a production facility, that reduction in flow is going to have an effect on what we produce. And what we produce is then going to have an effect on what we go out and sell. So there are these feedback loops that are continuously going on that are so complex that unless we actually take the time to map them out and try and understand what our business is and what our business stands for, it's very difficult for us to just create a new product because we think it's important to do so. I hope that helps. I'm trying to use a business example, but I can speak about ones from an ecology perspective as well, but I don't think that's relevant for today.
Thank you for your answer. One thing from my perspective when talking about ecosystems is that when you touch an element of this ecosystem, you can't measure the consequences of this change that you brought to your ecosystem. How can you add experiential or experimental approaches to an ecosystem that you don't measure the effects?
So, if I can just understand your question, you're saying that if you make a change in one system, are you talking about the impact on another ecosystem, or are you talking about within the same system? If you can just clarify that for me.
Within the same ecosystem.
How can you experiment and get feedback? Oh, okay. Is that your question? So quite often we can use digital twins. We can understand and we can simulate our environments and the flows that we've got. There's great simulation tools out there that we can use. Automation will also assist us with making sure that some of these things that we're experimenting with and having digital twins, having the ability to virtually have these causal impacts, change these flows and affect the stocks, the balance of certain elements within our systems, we can get pretty close to something that will give us some idea of what's going to happen in reality. But of course, we need to experiment. Of course, we need to run these experiments with user groups, get real people talking to us. We can validate on systems and prototype as much as we want, or simulate as much as we want, but that's not the same as being out there and talking to real people.
Thank you. One other question: what is the main benefit of the report in your opinion?
What is the main benefit of which report?
I don't know which report they are talking about. It's a question from Kaltoum. How business can generate profits? Let's move to a new question. How business can generate profits with an experimental approach?
By validating those experiments in the marketplace, business loses profits from investing in building products that don't have any market demand for them. So it's vital that we're experimenting, that we create these MVPs, these minimum viable products that we get feedback from the marketplace on, and then make intelligent choices as to how do we progress our development. If we're not making experiments, if we're not prototyping, the chances of not making great profits is extremely high. And I don't know many large businesses that I work with that are willing to do that at this point in time.
Thank you. With this, we come to the conclusion of our session. Thank you. It was lovely to have you here with us, and it was very interesting hearing you talk to us about this impact.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Tom.
So, thank you.
All the best for today and tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.